Good afternoon. I'm David Ferriero, Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the William G. McGowan Theater this afternoon here at the National Archives for our program on Noel Rae's book, The Great Stain, Witnessing American Slavery. We're glad you could be with us today, whether you're here in the theater or joining us through our YouTube channel. Before we start today's program, I'd like to tell you about two other programs coming up in this theater soon. Next Wednesday, February 28th, is the beginning of our annual showcase of Academy Award-nominated documentaries and short subjects. From Wednesday through Sunday, we'll show all the nominated films in the categories of documentary feature, documentary short subject, live action short film, and animated short film. You can find the names of the films and the schedule at our online event calendar on archives.gov. This free annual event is extremely popular, so register for it, and you'll find registration information online. On Monday, March 5th at noon, we'll host a program with the Historical Office of the Secretary of Defense. Edward Kiefer, author of Harold Brown, Offsetting the Soviet Military Challenge, 1977 to 1981, will moderate a discussion on how the former Secretary of Defense Brown worked to counter the Soviet Union's growing military strength during the administration of President Jimmy Carter. Former Secretaries of Defense Brown and William Perry will be part of that discussion. To learn more about these and all of our programs and exhibitions, consult our monthly calendar of events online at archives.gov. Check out our website or sign up at the table outside the theater to get email updates, and you'll also find information about other National Archives programs and activities. Another way to get more involved with the National Archives is to become a member of the National Archives Foundation. The foundation supports the work of the agency, especially its education and outreach activities, and their applications for membership in the lobby. In The Great Stain, Noel Rae brings together first-hand accounts of 300 years of slavery in America. In historical discourse, we often talk about the institution of slavery. We examine the debates over the legal questions concerning slavery and its expansion in the United States, its role in the origins and conduct of the Civil War. But works such as The Great Stain bring us back to the human level, allowing us to hear what the institution meant for an individual. The National Archives holds billions of records, and I like to say that within those records we have everyone's story. Some stories are relatively easy to follow, like a narrative written in support of a pension claim, and others must be traced from document to document, making us glean a little bit from each until we can put together a sequence of events. The bits of evidence we collect allow us to verify stories handed down through generations and fill out long forgotten details. The Archives has an extraordinary amount of primary source material about slavery and emancipation. We find documentation in court records, slave manifests, emancipation papers, military service records, pension records, Freedmen's Bureau records, and more. These invaluable sources allow us the privilege of being able to listen to people telling their stories in their own voices. And when authors republish these stories and make them more widely available, the voices continue for future generations. So let's now turn to Noel Rae and hear about his newest book, The Great Stain. A native of London, England, he spent 2 years in the British Army and received an honors degree in history from Oxford University. After living a while in Italy, where he taught English as a second language, he returned to London and was a stockbroker for a time. In 1960, he came to the States for a short visit and has been here ever since. In the States, he has had a colorful career, working briefly as a door-to-door salesman, as a translator at the UN, as a freelance editor, and as an executive editor at Reader's Digest, before turning to writing books on American history based on original first-person material. His previous books are People's War, Original Voices of the American Revolution, and Witnessing America, the Library of Congress book of first-hand accounts of public life. And to bring these stories from The Great Stain to life today, Noel Rae has asked several National Archives staff members to read some of the first-hand accounts from his book. So please welcome Noel Rae.
Where do I go? Yeah? Thank you. So Good morning. Oh, right, very briefly. The title of my book comes from something that President John Quincy Adams said in 1838, when he called slavery a deadly disease, a great and foul stain upon the North American Union. My purpose in compiling this book has been not to analyze the disease, but to describe its symptoms, to answer the question, what was slavery actually like? To achieve this, I have assembled a large number of first-person eyewitness accounts that from a wide range of sources and woven them together into a continuous narrative that begins in medieval Africa and ends with the close of the Civil War. Now, to help me read these things, we have three readers who will now appear. The first is Melanie Griffin. Hello, Melanie Griffin. John Larson. John. And Damani Davis. Damani? Right, okay. So the first piece, the rather grim story, is told by Henrietta King of Virginia. It comes from a 1930s interview, part of the Federal Writers Project, when Henrietta King was in her very late 80s. Melanie will read the opening paragraph. John will then interject an explanatory paragraph, and Melanie will then resume. So, Melanie.
All right. See this face? See this mouth all twisted over here so I can't shut it? See that eye? All red, ain't it? Been that way for 80-some years. Guess it's gonna stay that way till I die. Well, old Mrs. made this face that way.
This happened when Henrietta, then aged about 8, was a house servant whose duties included emptying the wash basin in the owner's bedroom. One day, she found a piece of peppermint candy on the washstand.
I seen that peppermint candy stick laying there. I ain't dare go near it, 'cause I knew old Mrs. just waiting for me to take it. Then one morning, I was so hungry that I couldn't resist. I went straight in there and I grabbed that stick of candy and I stuffed it in my mouth. Chewed it down so quick so Mrs. never knew it was me. Next morning, old Mrs. say, "Henrietta, you took that piece of candy out of my room?" "No, ma'am, I ain't seen no candy." "Child, you lying to me. You took that candy." "Dead Mrs., I tell the truth. I ain't seen no candy." "You lying. I'm going to whip you. Come here." She got her rawhide from the nail by the fireplace. She grabbed me by the arm, and she tried to turn me across her knee while she sat in the rocker so she could hold me. I twisted and turned till she finally called her daughter. That girl come in and took that strap like her mother told her, and commenced to lay it on me real hard while Mrs. hold me. I twisted away, so there wasn't no chance of her getting in a solid lick. Then old Mrs. lift me up by the legs. She struck my head under the bottom of the rocker, and she rocked forward so as to hold my head and whip me some more. I guess they must have whipped me near an hour with the rocker leg pressing down on my head. Next thing I knew, the old doctor was there, and I was laying in a pallet in the hall, and he was pushing and digging in my face, but I couldn't do nothing at all. Seemed like the rocker pressing on the young bones had crushed them all into a soft pulp. The next day I couldn't open my mouth, and I felt it. There were no bones on the left side at all, and my mouth kept slipping over to the right side, and I couldn't chew nothing, only drink milk. Well, Mrs. must have got kind of sorry, 'cause she got the doctor to come regular to pry open my mouth. He gets it after a while, so as it opened, I could move my lips, but it kept moving over to the right side, and he couldn't stop that. After a while, it was just over to where it is now, and I ain't never grown no more teeth on that side. Ain't never been able to chew nothing good since. Don't even remember what it is like to chew. Here, put your hand on my face, right here on this left cheek. That's what slave days were like.
Okay, thank you. So now, to begin at the beginning of the events that led to Henrietta King's tragedy, we must go back more than 500 years to the time when the Portuguese began raiding the west coast of Africa and enslaving its people. At first, the slaves they captured were sold in the domestic market only, as in this account of a sale that took place in Lagos in 1444.
On the next day, very early in the morning because of the great heat, the seamen began to make ready their boats and bring their captives ashore. And these people, placed all together in that field, were a sight to be wondered at. But who could be so hard-hearted as not to be filled with pity at the sight of those people? For some kept their heads low, their faces bathed in tears as they looked at each other, and while others stood, groaning piteously, looking up to heaven and exclaiming loudly, as if asking for the help from the Father of nature. Others struck their faces with the palms of their hands, throwing themselves full length upon the ground, and still others made dirge-like lamentations after the manner of their country. And though we could not understand their words, the sounds they made were full of sadness. To add to their suffering, the officials responsible for dividing the captives now arrived, and began separating them from each other into 5 equal parts. And so fathers were separated from sons, husbands from wives, brothers from brothers. Completing the partition was very difficult, for as often as sons were placed in one part, seeing their fathers in another, they would rush over to join them. Mothers threw themselves on the ground, clasping their children in their arms, ignoring the blows that rained down upon them. Moreover, to make matters worse, the field was invaded by crowds of people who had taken the day off from work and were now causing such tumult and confusion as to make the business of handling and dividing the captives even more difficult. The prince was there, mounted on a powerful steed and accompanied by his retinue. He showed little interest in his share of the profits, and very soon had given away the 46 captives that came to him as his 5th. His chief reward and greatest pleasure lay in the thought that so many lost souls would now be brought to salvation. Nor was this expectation in vain, for as soon as they had learned our language, these people at once became Christians. And I, who composed this work of history, have seen in the town of Lagos boys and girls who were the children and grandchildren of those first captives, born in this country, and now as good and true Christians as if they had descended directly from those who were first baptized.
Right, thank you. So now, moving ahead. In 1789, after hearing a great deal of evidence, a committee of England's Privy Council concluded that, on average, 4.5% of slaves died while being held on the coast before sailing, 12.5% died during the crossing, and 33% died during their first year in the colonies. No estimates were made of the numbers killed in the raids and wars that provided so many of the captives, or of those who died during the long trek from the interior to the coast. In their campaign to end the slave trade, English abolitionists focused on the 12.5% who died during the crossing. Among those testifying on their behalf was Alexander Falconbridge, a ship's doctor.
It frequently happens that the Negroes, on being purchased by the Europeans, become raving mad, and many of them die in that state, particularly the women. While I was one day ashore at Bonny, I saw a middle-aged stout woman who had been brought down from the fair the preceding day, chained to the post of a black trader's door in a state of furious insanity. On board a ship in Bonny River, I saw a young Negro woman chained to the deck, who had lost her senses soon after she was purchased. The men Negroes, on being brought aboard the ship, are immediately fastened together, 2 by 2, by handcuffs on their wrists and by irons riveted on their legs. They are then sent down between the decks and placed in an apartment partitioned off for this purpose. The women are likewise placed in a separate apartment between decks, but without being ironed, that is, shackled, and an adjoining door on the same deck is besides appointed for the boys. The men are frequently stowed so close as to admit of no other posture than lying on their sides. Neither will the height between decks, unless directly under the grating, permit them the indulgence of an erect posture, especially where there are platforms, which is generally the case. These platforms are a kind of shelf about 8 or 9 feet in breadth, extending from the side of the ship toward the center. They are placed nearly midways between the decks, at the distance of 2 or 3 feet from each deck. Upon these, the Negroes are stowed in the same manner as they are on the deck underneath. About 8 in the morning, the Negroes are generally brought up on deck, their irons being examined. A long chain, which is locked to a ring bolt fixed to the deck, is run through the rings of the shackles of the men, then locked to another ring bolt, fixed also in the deck. By this means, 50 and 60, and sometimes more, are fastened to one chain in order to prevent them from rising or endeavoring to escape. If the weather proves favorable, they are permitted to remain in that situation till 4 or 5 in the afternoon, when they are disengaged from the chain and sent down. Their food is served to them in tubs, about the size of a small water bucket. They are placed round these tubs in companies of 10 to each tub, out of which they feed themselves with wooden spoons. Numberless quarrels take place among them during their meals, more especially when they are put upon short allowance, which frequently happens if the passage from the coast of Guinea to the West India Islands proves of unusual length. Upon the Negroes refusing to take subsistence, I have seen coals of fire, glowing hot, put on a shovel and placed so near their lips as to scorch and burn them. And this has been accompanied with threats of forcing them to swallow the coals if they persisted in refusing to eat. These means have generally had the desired effect. Exercise being deemed necessary for the preservation of their health, they are sometimes obliged to dance when the weather will permit their coming on deck. If they go about it reluctantly, or do not move with agility, they are flogged, a person standing by them all the time with a cat and 9 tails in their hands for that purpose. The poor wretches are frequently compelled to sing also, but when they do, their songs are generally, as may naturally be expected, melancholy lamentations of their exile from their native country. The hardship and inconveniences suffered by the Negroes are scarcely to be conceived. Whenever the sea is rough and the rains heavy, it becomes necessary to shut the portholes. The fresh air being thus excluded, the Negroes' room grew very soon intolerably hot. The confined air, rendered noxious by the effluvia exhaled from their bodies, and by being repeatedly breathed, soon produces fevers and fluxes, which generally carries off great numbers of them. The place allotted for the sick Negroes is under the half-deck, where they lie on bare planks. By this means, those who are emaciated frequently have their skin, and even their flesh, entirely rubbed off by the motion of the ship from the prominent parts of the shoulders, elbows, and hips, so as to render the bones in those parts quite bare. The excruciating pain which the poor sufferers feel from being obliged to continue in such difficult situation, frequently for several weeks, is not to be conceived. The surgeon, upon going between decks in the morning to examine the situation of the slaves, frequently finds several dead, and among the men sometimes a dead and living Negro fastened by their irons together. When this is the case, they are brought up on deck, and being laid on the grating, the living Negro is disengaged and the dead one thrown overboard. One morning, upon examining the place allotted for the sick Negroes, I perceived that one of them, who was so emaciated as scarcely able to walk, was missing, and was convinced that he must have gone overboard in the night, probably to put a more expeditious period to his suffering. And, to conclude on this subject, I could not help being sensibly affected, on a former voyage, observing what an apparent eagerness a black woman seized some dirt from off an African yam and put it into her mouth, seeming to rejoice at the opportunity of possessing some of their native earth.
Thank you. So, while still on the middle passage, what they called mutinies, or otherwise people called insurrections, were a constant anxiety for the captains of slave ships. This account of one such insurrection appeared in the Gentleman's Magazine of February 1753.
By Captain Wright, from the coast of Guinea, we had the following account of the loss of the Marlborough. Captain Codd of Bristol, by an insurrection of the Negroes, the beginning of October last. Captain Codd, having indulged 28 Gold Coast Negroes their liberty on deck to assist in navigating the ship, they behaved for some time in a very tractable civil manner. But on the third day, after he sailed away from the bar of Bonny, while most of the crew were cleaning below the rooms, and none but the captain and 2 white men, armed with cutlasses, left above to take care of the ship. All of a sudden, the Negroes on deck snatched the arm from them, wounded the captain, and forced him up the foreshrouds, where they shot him dead. The rest of the Negroes, securing the quarterdeck and small arms, became soon masters of the ship, and spent the rest of the day in most cruelly butchering the crew, who were in number 35, except the boatswain and the cabin boy, whom they saved to conduct the ship back again, which they did after 8 days, and came to an anchor within a bar of Bonny. About the same time, the Hawk, Captain Jones of Bristol, arrived at the place, and hearing of the affair, bore down on her with an intent to retake her. But the Negroes were so expert at the great guns and small arms that they soon repelled him. After putting the Negroes from Benin ashore, they chose its number 270. The remainder, consisting of 150, weighed anchor, set their sails, and stood out to sea with intent, as it is imposed, to go to their own country, though the undertaking was extremely hazardous, as they had no one to navigate the ship, the boatswain having jumped overboard the night before they sailed.
Thank you. So, what kind of life awaited those who survived the crossing? Here, from Solomon Northup's famous book, 12 Years a Slave, is an account of how things were on a fairly typical cotton plantation.
The hands are required to be in the cotton fields as soon as it is light in the morning, and with the exception of 10 or 15 minutes, which is given to them at noon to swallow their allowance of cold bacon, they are not permitted to be a moment idle until it is too dark to see. And when the moon is full, they sometimes labor till the middle of the night. They do not dare stop even at dinner time, nor return to the quarters, however late it may be, until the order to halt is given by the driver. The day's work over in the field, the baskets are carried to the gin house, where the cotton is weighed. No matter how fatigued and weary he may be, no matter how much he longs for sleep and rest, a slave never approaches the gin house with his basket of cotton, but with fear. If it falls short in weight, he knows that he must suffer. And if he has exceeded it, in all probability, his master will measure the next day's task accordingly. After weighing, following the whippings, and then the baskets are carried to the cotton house and their contents stored away. This done, the labor of the day is not yet ended by any means. Each one must then attend to his respective chores. One feeds the mules, another the swine, another cuts the wood, and so forth. Besides, the packing is all done by candlelight. Finally, at a late hour, they reach the quarters, overcome with the long day's toil. Then a fire must be kindled in the cabin, the corn ground in the small hand mill, and supper and dinner for the next day prepared. All that is allowed them is corn and bacon, which is given out every Sunday morning. Each one receives, as his weekly allowance, 3.5 pounds of bacon, and corn enough to make a peck of meal. That is all. An hour before daylight, the horn is blown. Then the slaves arouse, prepare their breakfast, fill the gourd with water, and in another deposit their dinner of cold bacon and corn cake, and hurry out to the field again. It is an offense invariably followed by a flogging to be found at the quarters after daybreak. Then the fears and labors of another day begin. And until it is closed, there is no such thing as rest.
Thank you. So slaves, of course, had no choice in the kind of work that they had to do, which is why William Wells Brown, who later became a leading abolitionist, found himself employed by a slave trader called Walker. Here he tells of a fairly typical incident.
Soon after we left St. Charles, a young child grew very cross and kept up noise during the greater part of the day. Mr. Walker complained of its crying several times and told the mother to stop the damned noise, or he would. The woman tried to keep the child from crying, but could not. We put up at night with an acquaintance of Mr. Walker, and in the morning, just as we were about to start, the child again commenced crying. Walker stepped up to her, the mother, and told her to give the child to him. The mother tremblingly obeyed. He took the child by one arm, as you would take a cat by a leg, walked into the house, and said to the lady, "Madam, I will make you a present of this little Negro. It keeps such a noise I can't bear it." "Thank you, sir," said the lady. The mother, as soon as she saw the child was to be left, ran up to Mr. Walker, and falling upon her knees, begged him to let her have her child. She clung around his legs and cried, "Oh, my child, my child! Master, do let me have my child. Oh, do, do, do. I will stop its crying if you only let me have it again." Mr. Walker commanded her to return to the ranks with the other slaves. Women who had children were not chained, but those that had none were. And as soon as her child was disposed of, she was chained to the gang.
Next, Delia Garlick, who was an old woman living in Montgomery, Alabama, when she told her story to an interview for the Federal Writers Project.
I was born in Powhatan, Virginia, and was the youngest of 13 children. I never seen none of my brothers or sisters except my brother William. Him and my mother and me was bought to the speculators, drove to Richmond and put into the warehouse with a drove of other Negroes. Then we was all put on the block and sold to the highest bidder. Never seen my brother William again. Mammy and me were sold to the man by the name of Carter. He was a sheriff in the county. There wasn't no good times at his house. He was a widower, and his daughter kept his house for him. I nursed for her one day. I was playing with the baby. It was hard. It hurt its little hand and commenced to cry. She whirled at me, picked up the hot iron and run it down my arm and my hand, and it took off the flesh when she done it. After a while, Master married again, but it wasn't no better. I seen his wife blacking her eyebrows with smut one day, so I thought I'd black mine just for fun. I rubbed some smut on my eyebrows and forgot to rub it off, and she catched me. She was a powerful mad and yelled, "You black devil! I shall show you to mock your betters." Then she picked up the stick on the stove wood and flails it against my head. I didn't know nothing more till I come. Laying on the floor, I heard the mistress say and one of the girls, "I thought her thick skull and cap of wool could take a better hit than that." I kept on staying there, and one night the master came in drunk and sat at the table with his head lolling around. I was waiting on the table, and he looked up to see me. I was scared, and it made him awful mad. He called the overseer and told him, "Take her out and beat some sense into her." I began to cry and run in the night, but I finally run back to the quarters and heard my mommy calling. I went in. Right away they came for me. A horse was standing in front of the house, and I was took that very night to Richmond and sold to a speculator's again. I never seen my mammy anymore. I has thought many times through all the years how my mammy looked at me that night. She pressed my hand in both of hers and said, "Be good and trust in the Lord." Trusting was the only hope that poor black critters in them days. Us just prayed for the strength to endure it to the end. We didn't expect nothing but to stay in bondage till we died.
So, patrols were an essential part of the slave system, and Solomon Northup explains how they worked.
They ride on horseback, headed by a captain, armed, and accompanied by dogs. They have the right to inflict discretionary chastisement upon a black man caught beyond the boundaries of his master's estate without a pass, and even to shoot him if he attempts to escape. The clatter of their horses' hoofs dashing by can be heard at all hours of the night, and frequently they may be seen driving a slave before them or leading him by a rope fastened around his neck to his owner's plantation.
And now Fanny Moore tells of a fairly typical incident.
I remember one night there was a dance at the houses in the quarters. All the Negroes was a-laughing and a-pattying, and their feet a-singing. The powder roller shoved the door open and started grabbing us. Uncle Joe's son, he decided that was one time to die, and he started to fight. He said he tried standing so many beatings, and he just couldn't stand no more. The powder rollers started beating him, and he started fighting. Oh, Lordy, it was terrible. They whipped him with a cowhide for a long time, and then one of them took the stick and hit him over his head and just busted it wide open. The poor boy fell on the floor, just a-moaning and a-groaning. The patty rollers just whipped in half a dozen of the Negroes and sent them home and left us with a dead boy.
Thank you. So, an unusual witness to American slavery was the upper-class and middle-aged Swedish novelist Fredrika Bremer, who spent 2 years, 1849 to 1851, in this country, taking notes as she went. Here she is in New Orleans, in midwinter, attending a slave auction with a medical friend.
Dr. D, I entered a large, somewhat cold, dirty hall on the basement of the house, and where a great number of people were assembled. About 20 gentleman-like men stood half-circled around a dirty wooden platform, which the moment was unoccupied. On each side by the wall stood a number of black men and women, and silent and serious. The whole assembly was silent, and it seemed to me as a heavy gray cloud rested upon it. One heard through the open door of rain heavily in the street. The gentleman looked askance and asked at me in gloomy expression, and probably wished that they could send me to the North Pole. 2 gentlemen hastily entered, one of them a tall, stout man with a gay and good-tempered aspect, evidently a bon vivant, ascended the auction platform. He came apparently from a good breakfast, and he seemed to be actively employed in swallowing his last mouthful. He took the auctioneer's hammer in his hand and addressed the assembly much as follows.
The slaves which I have now to sell, for what price I can get, are a few home slaves, all the property of one master. This gentleman, having given his bond for a friend who afterward became bankrupt, has been obliged to meet his responsibilities by parting with his faithful servants. These slaves are thus sold, not in consequence of any faults which they possess, or for any deficiencies. They are all faithful and excellent servants, and nothing but hard necessity would have compelled their master to part with them. They are worth the highest price, and he who purchases them may be sure that he will increase the prosperity of his family.
After this, he beckoned a woman to come among the blacks. After this, he beckoned to a woman among the blacks to come forward, and he gave her his hand to mount upon the platform, where she remained standing beside him. She was tall, well-grown mulatto with a handsome but sorrowful countenance, and a remarkably modest, noble demeanor. She bore on her arm a young sleeping child, upon which, during the whole auction ceremonial, she kept her eyes immovably riveted. With her hand cast down, she wore a gray dress made to the throat, and a pale yellow handkerchief cheeked with brown and tied around her head. The auctioneer now began to laud the woman's good qualities to assembly. He praised her character, her good disposition, order, fidelity, her uncommon qualifications for taking care of her house, her pity, her talents, and remarked that the child which she bore at her breast, which was to be sold with her more, also increased her value. After this, he shouted with a loud voice, "Now, gentlemen, how much for this very superior woman and her child?" He pointed with outstretched arms and forefingered from one to the other of the gentlemen who stood around. The first one and another replied to his appeal with a short, silent nod, and all the while to be continued in this style.
"Do you offer me $500? Gentlemen, I am offered $500 for this superior woman and her child. It is a sum not to be thought of. She, with her child, is worth double that money. 550? 600? 650? 660? 670? My good gentlemen, why do you not all at once say $700 for this uncommonly superior woman and her child? $700? It is downright robbery. She would have not sold at that price if her master had not been so unfortunate."
The hammer fell heavily. The woman and her child were sold for $700 to one of those dark, silent figures before her. Who he was, whether he was good or bad, whether he would lead her into tolerable or intolerable slavery, of all this, the bought and sold woman and mother knew as little as I did. Neither to what part of the world he would take her, and the father of the child, where was he? With eyes still riveted upon the sleeping child, with dejected but submissive mien, the handsome mulatto stepped down from the auction platform to take her stand beside the wall, but on the opposite side of the room. Next, a very dark young Negro girl stepped upon the platform. She wore a bright yellow handkerchief tied to a dainty round her head, so that the two ends stood out like little wings, one on each side. Her figure remarkably trim and neat, and her eyes glanced around the assembly, both bold and inquiring. The auctioneer exalted her merits likewise, and then he explained. How much for this very young likely girl? She was a swoon sold, and if I recollect rightly, for $350. After her, a young man took his place upon the platform. He was a mulatto, and he had remarkably good consonance, expressive and gentlest refinement. And he had been a servant in his former master family, and he had been brought upon by him, as greatly beloved by him and desired to do so, a most excellent young man. He sold for $600. After this came an elderly woman, who had also one of those good-natured, excellent consonants so common among black population, and whose demeanor and general appearance showed that she too had been in the servants of a good master, and having been accustomed to general treatment, had been gentle and happy. All these slaves, as well as the young girl, who looked pert rather than good, but the expression of her having the accustomed to the affectionate family life. And now, what was to those future fate? How bitterly, if they fell into the hands of the wicked, would they feel the difference between then and now? Horrible to their lot. Horrible would be their lot. The mother in particular, whose soul was centered in her child, and who perhaps would have soon to see that child sold away, far away from her. What would then be her state of mind?
Many of slavery's defenders were ready to admit that there were cruel masters, but claimed that these were exceptions. As one popular argument ran, just because some husbands murdered their wives, it did not follow that marriage should be abolished. It was also claimed that most cases of brutality were the work of Negro drivers or of owners belonging to the lower levels of white society. On the other hand, to be a servant in the household of a well-to-do family, to spend half a year on a plantation and half in town, was to enjoy a carefree life of easy duties and mutual affection. Unfortunately for this comforting belief, two sisters, Sarah and Angelina Grimke, knew better. And since they were the daughters of Judge Grimke of the Supreme Court of South Carolina and a leading member of Charleston society, their testimony carried weight. For their boldness, the two sisters were ostracized and had to move to Philadelphia, where Angelina married the abolitionist Theodore Dwight Weld, with whom she wrote and edited American Slavery as It Is. Sarah was the first to publish, which she did in 1830.
As I left my native state on account of slavery and deserted the home of my fathers to escape the sound of the lash and the shrieks that tortured victims, I would gladly bury oblivion and recollection of those scenes with which I have been familiar. But this cannot be. They come over my memory like glorious spectators, and implore me with relentless power. In the name of God of mercy, in the name of crucified Savior, for the sake of slaveholder, as well as slave to bear the witness of horrors in Southern prison house. The actors of these tragedies were all men and women of the highest respectability, and of the first families in South Carolina, and their cruelties did not in the slightest degree affect their standing in society. A handsome mulatto woman, about 18 or 20 years of age, whose independent spirit could not brook the degradation of slavery, was in the habit of running away. For this offense, she had been repeatedly sent to her master and mistress to be whipped by the keeper of Charleston workhouse. This had been done with such inhumane severity as a lacquerate by her back in the most shocking manner. A finger could not be laid between the cuts. But the love of liberty was too strong to be annihilated by torture. And as a last resort, she was whipped at several different times and kept close prisoner. A heavy iron collar, with 3 long prongs projected from it, was placed round her neck, and a strong and a sound front tooth was extracted, to be served as a mark to describe her. In case of escape, these outrages were committed in a family where the mistress daily read the scriptures and assemble her children in family worship. Yet this suffering slave, who was the seamstress of a family, would continually in her presence, sitting in the chamber to sew, or engaged in her other household work, with lacquerate and bleeding back, the mulinated mouth and heavy iron collar, without so far as appeared exciting any feeling of compassion.
And Sarah's sister, Angelina, also had this to say.
Persons who own plantations yet live in cities often take children from their parents as soon as they are weaned and send them into the country, because they do not want the time of the mother taken by attendance upon her own child, it being too valuable to the mistress. As a favor, she is in some cases permitted to go to see them once a year. So on the other hand, if field slaves happen to have children of the age suitable to the convenience of the master, they are taken from their parents and brought to the city. Parents are almost never consulted as to the disposition to be made of their children. They have as little control over the domestic animals over the disposal of their children. Every cruel and revolting, carefully concealed from strangers, especially those from the north. Take an instance. I have known the master and mistress of a family send their friends to borrow servants to wait on companies because their own slaves have been too cruelly flogged in the workhouse, and they cannot walk without limping at every step. And their putrefied flesh emitted such an intolerable smell that they were not fit to be in the presence of company. How can northerners know these things when they are hospitable, received as southern tables and firesides. I repeat, no one who has not been an integral part of slaveholding community can have any idea of the abominations.
There were many stories of resistance, some famous, such as Nat Turner's Rebellion, and some on a much smaller scale. And here are 3 such stories, the first by Leonard Franklin of Warren, Arkansas, who recalled this of his mother.
There wasn't many men could class up with her when it come to working. She could do more work than any 2 men. There wasn't no use for no one man to try to do nothing with her. No overseer never down her. Her boss, a man called Pennington, went off deer hunting once. While he was gone, the overseer tried to whip her. She knocked him down and tore his face up so that the doctor had to tend to him. When Pennington came back, he noticed his face all patched up and asked him what was the matter with it. The overseer told him that he went down in the field to whip the hands and that he just thought he would hit Lucy a few licks to show the slaves that he was impartial. But she jumped on him and like to tore him up. Old Pennington said to him, "Well, if that is the best you could do with her, damned if you won't just have to take it."
And Fanny Berry of Virginia told this story about a fellow slave called Suki.
She was a big, strapping Negro girl that never had nothing much to say. She used to cook for Miss Sarah Ann, but old master was always trying to make Suki his girl. One day, Suki was in the kitchen making soap, had 3 great big pots of lard, just coming to a boil in the fireplace when old master came in for her to get after her. He lay into her. She ain't answer him a word. Then he tells Suki to take off her dress. She told him no. Then he grabbed her and pulled her down off into her shoulders, and tried to pull her down on the floor. Then that black girl got mad. She took a punch old master and made him break loose. And then she gave him a shove and pushed him hard parts in the hot pot of the soap. Soap near boiling and burnt him near to the death. He got up holding his hind parts and ran from the kitchen, not daring yell, because he didn't want Miss Ann to know about it.
And this story, first published in the West Feliciana Whig, was included by Frederick Law Olmsted in his book, The Cotton Kingdom.
On Saturday last, a runaway Negro was killed in the parish of East Baton Rouge, just below the line of this parish, under the following circumstances. 2 citizens of Port Hudson, learning that a Negro was at work on a flatboat, loading with sand, just below that place, was suspected of being a runaway, went down in a skiff for the purpose of arresting him. Having seized him and put him into the skiff, they started back, but had not proceeded far when the Negro, who had been at the oars, seized a hatchet and assaulted one of them, wounding him very seriously. A scuffle ensued, in which both parties fell overboard. They were both rescued by a citizen, pulling to them with the skiff. Finding him so unmanageable, the Negro was put ashore, and the parties returned to Port Hudson for arms and a pack of Negro dogs, and started again with the intention to capture him. They soon got him on his trail, and when they found him again, he was standing at bay upon the outer edge of a large raft of driftwood, armed with a club and a pistol. In this position, he bade defiance to men and dogs, knocking the latter into the water with his clubs, and resolutely threatening death to any man who approached him. Finding him obstinately determined not to surrender, one of his pursuers shot him. He fell at the 3rd fire, and so determined was he not to be captured that when an effort was made to rescue him from the drowning, he made battle with his club, and sunk, waving his weapon in angry defiance at his pursuers.
Boston-born Mary Livermore was serving as a governess to the family of a southern planter when she witnessed this scene.
Caroline, a pretty, graceful mulatto, was a servant in the dining room. One morning, when passing a cup of coffee to Mr. her master and owner, by an unlucky movement of his hand, he knocked it from her tray, on which she served it to his knees. It was warm weather. He was attired in linen, and the coffee scalded him. Jumping up with oath, he raised his chair and fell the girl to the floor, striking her 2 or 3 times after she had fallen. She was carried to the cottage of Aunt Aggie, her mother, who had witnessed the scene from an adjoining room, stunned, bruised, bleeding, and unconscious. I left the table and withdrew to my own apartment, shocked beyond impression. Later in the day, Aunt Aggie came to my room on some household errand. When I expressed my indignation at the brutal statement her daughter had received, I was astonished into the change that came over the tactrum and the dignified woman. Turning squarely about and facing me with a large, lustrous eyes blazing with excitement, she spoke in a tone and manner that would have befitted and seared uttering a prophecy. There's a day coming, she said, with her right hand uplifted. I hear a rumbling in the chariots. I see a flashing in the guns. White folks' blood is a-running on the ground like quiver, in the dead heap of the high, measuring to the level of the shoulder. O Lord, hasten the day when the blows and the bruises and the aches and the pains shall come to the white folks, and the buzzard shall eat them as they is dead in the streets. O Lord, roll the chariot and give the black people rest and peace. O Lord, give me pleasure in living to the day when I shall see the white folks shot down like wolves when they come hungry out of the woods. And without another word, she walked from the room.
A less alarming example of slave religion comes from the experiences of Thomas H. Jones, published in 1885. Though born into slavery, Thomas was lucky enough to have had an easygoing master called Owen Holmes, who allowed him to range about the countryside, preaching and holding camp meetings. One of these took place at the estate belonging to a Mr. Blackman Crumpling. The meeting was probably held outdoors or in a barn. Blacks and whites attended in about equal numbers and on equal terms.
My remarks at this meeting were based upon the scripture, O Lord, revive thy work. And the Lord did revive it in a mighty power. Large numbers of both white and colored persons were stricken down and led to cry for mercy at God's hand. We continued the meeting to a very late hour in the evening. Many were converted and returned to their homes shouting the praises of God. One of Mr. Crumpling's daughters exhorted and shouted praises until her strength gave way, and she fell to the ground in a dead faint. It was one of the best meetings I ever attended. There is one incident of which I would like to speak just here. One day, my master sent me to do an errand at Mr. Crumpling's. When I reached the house, I found the family at dinner, and to my great surprise, I observed that the slaves were eating at the same table with the white people. I had never beheld the like before. Clearly, what I beheld at Mr. Crumpling's was due to the grace of God, which makes all one regardless of color or condition.
Late in the summer, while staying with his owner's family at a country tavern, Jones got up while it was still dark to feed and groom the horses.
As I stepped out of doors, I discovered that the stars were falling in all directions. I ran to the kitchen and shouted to the cook that the heavens were all on fire. I then ran to the great house and awoke my master. He came outdoors, looked at the heavens for a few moments, and then asked me what I thought it was. I don't know, I replied, unless it's the day of judgment. I turned to go back to the kitchen. As I did so, I saw the cook standing outside the door, swinging her arms and shouting at the top of her voice, Glory to God, glory to God, supposing that the end of the world had come. By this time, the whole plantation was awake, and everybody was out gazing, some in fear and some in joy. The tavern keeper came out and asked if I could not stop the cook making so much noise. I got a man to help me, and we carried her into the kitchen. We could not stop her shouting. She begged us to let her go out again. She wanted to see the Savior when he came. I went back to the tavern keeper and told him we could do nothing with her. Well, let her alone then, he replied. As day began to dawn, the fiery red of the heavens began to disappear. And at sunrise, it was all gone. I went to my master and told him the horses were ready for a start at any moment.
What Jones had witnessed was the great Leonids meteor storm of 1833, the most spectacular on record, with meteors falling at the rate of over 100,000 an hour. Like the cook, a great many people took it as a sign that the second coming was imminent. And finally, here's the story of another slave, Ophelia Jemison, who did actually get to see her Savior.
When I was seeking the Lord before I was converted, he placed me in hell to convince me. I stayed down there most of the hour. Hell is one terrible place. The fire down there is a big pit of brimstone, a roaring and a roaring. It's bigger than Charleston, it seemed like. I see the souls boiling in the pit of brimstone. Oh, God, have mercy on my soul. When I've been converted, I went to heaven in the spirit and see with my eye of faith. I done been there. Heaven is white as snow. God and the Holy Ghost. There is one that sat at the big table with a book stretched out before him. God's two eyes just like two suns shining, and his hair like lamb's wool. I walk in there and look over at his shoulder. He had a long gold pen and write down the names of people down on earth yet. And when he called and roll up there in his own time, he known them. Oh, I rejoicing, never the like before. An angel took me and showed me the stars, how they hang up there by the silver cord, and on the moon just a ball of blood, but it ain't no hold it up. And the sun on the rim of all these going around and around, and the Christ sitting in the rocking chair over the sun. Gabriel and Michael was with him, one on this side and one on the other, holding the laws. I see everything just like I say. Sweet Jesus, I hope I reach the place I see.
Thank you. That's the end. Thank you. Oh, good. So I don't have to answer questions. Right.
Folks, just a reminder, there's a book signing one level up in the archive bookstore. We will see you up there in just a few moments.